And that's when it looked as though nuclear missiles might actually be used over Cuba.
The missile crisis was resolved temporarily, but I also realized quite clearly that imperialism was not going to be defeated through pacific protest, because out in the bay threatening Cuba was a warship. And of course there'd been the invasion of the Bay of Pigs. There were every kind of sabotage was being carried out every 24 hours. The CIA were working to assassinate Fidel Castro. You can't sit down in the streets of a city anymore when you see this.
And you saw this from inside the country?
Yes. I was very, very impressed with what I saw in Cuba, because I saw the people being educated for the first time. I saw the books that were being printed for the young children with their own history. I read in these books the accounts of the heroism of the resistance at the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the efforts that were being made in agriculture, the volunteer teams that were going to the cane fields. And I felt very inspired to see in actuality what I thought was a complete socialist revolution. And I was very inspired to see the work that had been begun in the Cuban cinema. There hadn't been any Cuban cinema, and now there was Cuban cinema, and they were writing and directing and preparing films about life in Cuba. And I could see that this was a tremendous development, and I could see it stood in great danger. And when I got back to England, I was very amazed, because my husband being in the cinema, he would constantly be meeting with writers and directors, and in their discussions I felt very dismayed, because they didn't seem to have any concept of what was going on in the world at all. Their vision seemed limited to their careers and what was happening in Britain, and they didn't see the world events that were taking shape and that were dominating also what was happening in Britain. So I was looking outwards in this way, and of course I was considering now big political questions, because now I hadn't got a party. What party was I going to have?
This is the Voice of America magazine show.
Vanessa Redgrave, as usual, was in the vanguard of the would-be...
I have a letter here from John Riley, dated June 4th, 1968. He says, I know the stand you take concerning the war in Asia, and I respect you very much for the way you say what you think and feel. Not until today did I realize how disgusting and terrible this whole thing is. All I want to do is to get out of this 4 years of nightmare, so I can gain my identity again, so I can go to college and start a successful life, and then just live. But instead I have to go to a country I have nothing to do with, and give my time and effort, and possibly my life. For what? I needed someone to write to, and you really understand how I feel. It's very important that people understand how you feel. Don't you think?
In 1964, a general election came up. The Tories had been in power for 13 years. And I thought, right, I must help take part in the election, and I will do everything I can to fight for the return of the Labour Party to office. If I do that, this will be a government that will oppose the Tory policy which supports the war in Vietnam. You see, why I thought the Labour Party was because I knew it was the working class built the Labour Party. I knew the working class had had a history of fighting to build trade unions, its own organisations, to fight to protect itself against the employers. And I knew that in the course of that struggle, it had fought to build a Labour Party, to have its own party in Parliament. I knew that the Labour MPs had protested very vociferously when Suez was bombed. I knew the Labour MPs had protested and demonstrated when the Africans in Kenya were murdered by the British. I knew that they had also protested, and very vociferously, during the war on Algeria. And I thought the Labour Party had this view and these questions, that it was a party that would fight at the side of the Algerian Revolution, because since the Labour MPs were protesting, I thought I had all these conceptions. And I canvassed very hard night and day, from door to door to door, and I spoke at many public meetings. The Labour Shadow Cabinet invited me to speak at many public meetings. I spoke with Crossman, I spoke at a meeting with Callaghan, I spoke at a meeting with George Brown, I spoke at a meeting with the Labour candidates for my constituency. And I did everything that I could to help in this way. And I remember the night of the election when Labour won, I was very proud that I'd helped to elect them, and later I was invited to drinks that were being given at Transport House, and all the new Labour cabinet were there. Wilson and Callaghan was there, George Brown was there, and I danced with Callaghan, and I was thrilled to bits. Subsequently, in the course of the next 6 months, I realised, alongside millions of other British people, workers and wage earners who'd done everything they could to get Labour elected, that this government supported the war in Vietnam, that it, in spite of everything that they'd said, in practice, that they did the opposite. I had personally assured housewives in flats that I had visited that the Labour Party was a different party from the Conservative Party. Women had said to me, it won't make any difference what we vote. The rent will still go up. And I had said, no, it won't, because this party, and I firmly believed it, is not like the Tory party. This party will change everything. It will lower the rents. Wages will go up. And of course, it broke every one of the pledges that it had made. So I tore my party card up and left the Labour Party.
Well, what were you doing artistically at that time? I mean, since the early 60s.
I find it very hard to remember. I was working in Shakespeare. I was winning many awards. The Labour Party put me up for a decoration. I was given the decoration by the Queen. I knew I'd been given it because I was a good actress and also because I'd fought for them in the election. So, of course, it meant nothing to me when I realised what this leadership was really about.